Joining me now to discuss is Vice President and Legal Fellow for Defending Education and former Senior Legal Fellow at the Heritage Foundation, Sarah Parshall Perry. Great to have you on the program. My, oh my, we've got this list to talk about, Sarah. MIT was the first school to decline the offer. You know, its president writing to Education Secretary Linda McMahon to say, quote, the premise of the document is inconsistent with our core belief that scientific funding should be based on scientific merit alone. So when you take a look at this list and what's going on, you know, how do you think this is going to influence the research and focuses coming out of the universities that accept this and those that don't for the next few years? I mean, this is pretty dramatic, right?
It is pretty dramatic, but actually, I think there are some principles that are a bit conflicting at play here. First of all, we don't want government involved in more education. We want government out of education. In fact, the federal bureaucracy for too long has been involved in federal education. We've spent $3 trillion since 1980 and the founding of the Department of Education, and we have very little to show for it. So I do have some concerns about the ability of these universities to be able to govern themselves independently if they accept the compact. But I think there are a lot of good things within the compact. In fact, considerations on race and sex, the prohibitions that this compact makes clear for consideration of those two in admissions and hiring are already prohibited under federal civil rights law, Title VI and Title IX to be exact. And that's all evidenced essentially in the compact. So this is simply complying within that portion of pre-existing federal law. And there are some good things about requesting tuition freezes. I will tell you that among those who have already declined the offer of the compact, Brown, MIT, and USC, those are among the top 20 most expensive tuition rates in the country. They average about $70,000 a year. So I certainly think that there are some financial interests at play.
You know, Sarah, one of the things that we're looking at, one of the policy changes this memo calls for, is these schools to not consider sex and ethnicity in admissions. But these factors can also influence the campus experience, of course. For example, most students don't want their school to be almost entirely female or male if they are attending a co-ed school. That's number one. How will schools be able to ensure a diverse experience, though, without factoring some of these things in? Is there any middle ground?
There is middle ground. In fact, the Supreme Court gave us some middle ground in Students for Fair Admission versus Harvard and its companion case against the University of North Carolina. And they specifically prohibited consideration of race in admissions, but said that there were alternatives for consideration of diverse perspectives, things that could be outlined, for example, in lived experiences, in the essays that are submitted in accordance with college applications, diversity of geography, economic diversity, different factors that would be allowed in consideration. That would be sufficient under federal civil rights law, would not violate the Supreme Court's ruling, would not violate Title VI, but would still give online and in-person campuses an opportunity to experience a diverse set of experiences and individuals.
Well, it's certainly going to be very interesting to see how this all plays out, and we appreciate your perspective. Vice President for Legal Fellow for Defending Education, Sarah Perry, thank you very much for joining us today, and we'll talk again soon.